what probably is one of the most extraordinary Sasquatch stories you will ever hear. We have been talking about Sasquatch on this radio program ever since Art Bell started it, and we have never been able to really come to a conclusion about what it was. We have listened to hoaxers, we have listened to fake and possibly real Sasquatch calls. We have talked to everybody, but we have never before talked to Jeff Meldrum about his book, Sasquatch, Legend and Science. And something has happened, and I'll just sum it up very simply. Dr. Jane Goodall, the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, one of the famed scientists working with primates, has said this about this book. Jeff Meldrum's book, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science, brings a much-needed level of scientific analysis to the Sasquatch or Bigfoot debate. Welcome, Jeff Meldrum, to the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, it's very exciting to have you here because we have a great interest on Dreamland in credible edge science, and that's what the show is all about. And very often we go out onto an edge and it's not so credible. But this is different. This is the best Sasquatch book I personally have ever read, to be honest with you, and I've read a lot of them.
Well, thank you.
It has also been a source of wonder for me. Can you tell me a little bit about why you came to this? Because you have taken this to a new level. This is not really speculative anymore. Once one reads this book, you know there is something out there. And there are prominent scientists who are agreeing with you more than Jane Goodall, Peter Matheson, Esteban Sarmiento, research associate at the American Museum of Natural History. Quite a laundry list of prominent names that never would have spoken out about this before your book.
Well, that has been one of the objectives of this endeavor, was to try to elevate the level of discourse, to try to move this from the realm of the just being lumped in with all things paranormal, considered paranormal or mysterious, to a simple question of biological science, and that is there a biological species of primate that lies behind the legend of Sasquatch? And we have tried to enumerate the evidence as it is currently understood that suggests that in fact there is an unrecognized species of primate out there. And I think that's where, I mean, we've always been challenged by this, the unfortunate stigma that has has lumped this subject with various and sundry other topics, some of which, I mean, I'm not passing judgment on any of these others, but many of which have not been fortunate enough to have the solid evidence, the physical evidence and trace evidence that is mounting in the case of the question of Sasquatch. And so many scientists have shied away from it. Those that were interested, that weren't prone to, in a knee-jerk reaction, reject it outright and offhandedly.
Yes.
Now we're starting to have more people speak out a little bit and say, well, yes, we really should look at this. We really should consider this data as scientists are charged to do.
You know, Tom Slick was a good friend of my family's, and I guess she is his daughter-in-law, or by marriage. Well, obviously by marriage, she's his daughter-in-law. Catherine Nixon Cook is a dear friend of ours to this day.
Yes.
And I know Catherine Cook recently went to Nepal and retraced Tom Slick's footsteps, and he was the first to really put any stock in any of this. And he attempted back in the 50s, with all sorts of limitations we don't have now, a scientific expedition in search of the Yeti. Now, and let me begin by asking if you think that this is an international phenomenon, or is it just confined to the Olympic forest, for example?
Well, there certainly are elements of the wild man motif, the icon, sprinkled throughout cultures worldwide. It does really seem to be a universal phenomenon, and there's been a lot of very interesting discussion about why that is, if this is some holdover of our of times early in the history, the prehistory of the human family, when we very likely shared this planet with other hominids and other very human-like apes that were more common than they are today. Or is it much more pragmatic, much more fundamental in that there simply are some of those species persisting in various corners in appropriate habitats around the globe? It's not a uniform experience. For example, the Yeti that drew Slick's attention to the Himalayas. We've done some interesting things on analyzing some of the footprints that have been attributed to the Yeti, and a great number of them can easily be dismissed as, or explained rather, as misidentified footprints of common wildlife, like bears, for example. And there seems to be a blurring, in fact, in the boundary between the notion of a bear-like figure and an ape-like figure amongst the Sherpas and indigenous populations in that region.
And the bear-like figure enters quite a bit into your book, and how I think quite often people are thinking that bears are actually of various kinds are actually Sasquatch. That happens a lot.
I think that does. I think it does, and you're right. In the book, Lynn Rogers, a brilliant bear biologist, discusses that. He actually thinks that it's probably more likely the reciprocal, and that is that people may see a Sasquatch, and because they cannot fit it into their worldview, into their frame of reference, they rationalize it as, well, it must have been a bear, and that may happen as often as other misidentifications in the reverse, seeing a flash of brown fur as a bear retreats from human contact, and of course the imagination gets the better of the witness, and they think Sasquatch must be the answer.
Right.
So misidentification is an important factor. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, I had two instances of people bringing footprints to my attention, photographed in the field, and in both cases they were superimposed, registered fore and hind paws of a bear. One was a very intriguing trackway down a dusty road that where the bear had very consistently stepped, such that the hind paws just overstepped and overlapped the toes of the forepaw, leaving what appeared to be a bipedal track with a admittedly wide straddle or wide step width and a very short step length, but this elongated, alternating pattern of elongated footprints. But on closer examination, and thankfully the photographer took some very good, crisp close-ups, you could point out very clearly the hind pad, or the pad of the forepaw with its concavity on its back surface, and some of the toes that escaped the overstepping hind paw, and you could see the divided pad of the hind paw with its metatarsal pad and its calcaneal pad, and there were no evident claw marks. The claws were obviously worn down considerably, but that does happen, and we need to deal with that. But I think it's very nearsighted and very naive for the armchair skeptic to simply dismiss all footprints as misidentified bear tracks. I mean, there clearly are distinguishing characteristics.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking more about what Sasquatch may actually be, if Sasquatch exists, as it apparently does. And then later in the show, we'll be asking you for your questions about this, because for The first time we are in beta test on blogtv.com, and this show is being broadcast live over Blog TV, and you can ask questions via the Blog TV chat room in the Dreamland section. The book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science by Jeff Meldrum, a very extraordinary and fine book about Sasquatch, available in stores everywhere, available from our Amazon.com store on UnknownCountry.com, and subscribe to UnknownCountry.com. Keep us going. We are subscriber supported. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
I'm going to use this first break to talk a little bit about Blog TV. We are going to be broadcasting Dreamland live on Blog TV as the program is made, and our subscribers will be receiving an email telling you when these broadcasts will take place. If you're a non-subscriber, you can use Blog TV to give you a reminder about when the next program will be aired. On Blog TV, you will be able to see my face, sometimes also the face of my guest if the guest has a webcam. And you will be able to listen live as we produce Dreamland and be able to send us questions over the chat interface on Blog TV. Now, to do this, you need to go first to blogtv.com and register as a user if you are going to chat. There'll be direct access to Blog TV over UnknownCountry.com as well. There will be a direct link to our Blog TV viewer. So enjoy this new and exciting way of participating in Dreamland. If you have difficulty using Blog TV, please contact Blog TV customer support, not UnknownCountry.com customer support or UnknownCountry.com subscribers customer support. We cannot help you with Blog TV problems, but it's very easy to use, so I don't think too many of you will have trouble with it. It's just important to know, remember, if you want to chat, you must first register with Blog TV. Otherwise, you can just enjoy and watch and listen live as we produce Dreamland. As soon as the system is up and running and we have a new show to prepare, subscribers will be informed by email. But we do not have anything on Blog TV right now, and we are not broadcasting on Blog TV at this time. All of our normal audio streams will continue to run as usual. Of course, we have no plans to change any of our audio streams. And now let's get back to our conversation with Jeff Meldrum, the author of Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, available in bookstores everywhere. Jeff has brought a level of understanding to this, which indicates that there should be much more scientific discourse because it's an important issue. And Jeff, before we go on further, why don't you let us know what you think these creatures are? And
right.
Okay, just that, and then we'll go on from there.
All right. Well, my null hypothesis, and I know that there's considerable varying opinions on this subject, but my null hypothesis, my working starting point is that we're dealing with a large ape. That all of the reports seem to be devoid of the trappings that are associated with what we consider to be later hominids or humans in our evolutionary history. From the first appearance of the genus Homo, we have material artifacts. We have stone tools and wooden tools and various things. With the advances accompanying the archaeological records of human prehistory, and all of the reports and all of the descriptions of Sasquatch, its behavior and anatomy, seem to be devoid of these, and yet find very readily their correlates amongst the anatomy and behavior of the known great apes, the chimp, gorilla, and orang. And other than its superficial resemblance to humans in its habit of walking on two legs, which is an interesting adaptation and has often been thought to be a rather unique adaptation of human evolution. I think sometimes too much stock is placed in the uniqueness of characteristics in evolutionary history. I think as we learn more about evolution, one of the, I think, is the fascinating things is nature's ability to solve problems in very similar ways, especially from rather similar starting points. And so a large ape in Asia, a large terrestrial ape restricted to the ground by its size and mass, with the fundamental anatomy of an ape, in my opinion, would readily have evolved bipedalism in response to energetic selection pressures and mechanical selection pressures of its limbs and its extremities that would have paralleled those taking place in Africa with the advent of bipedalism in early hominid evolution, the early ancestors of the lineage that eventually gave rise to the human family. So that's kind of where I'm approaching it from, and of course I'm always open to alternate interpretations and alternate hypotheses that are supported by data. But to date, I haven't personally experienced any of that data that suggests extraordinary intelligence or other powers or abilities. I mean, it just seems to be a very reclusive, very elusive great ape, very rare in its habitat, very able to avoid encounters with humans when it desires to. One of
the things about the elusiveness that you point out of mammals in the book is that their equipment, as it were, their eyes, their ears, their sense of smell, it gives them an ability to be very, very careful about who sees them and who doesn't, and witness the mountain lion, which is here in California and occasionally will leap out of nowhere and attack somebody on a hiking path. These animals are incredibly elusive.
Yes.
Remarkably.
Well, even here in Pocatello, I mean, we go about our day and our routine, and people in Pocatello are a large number are active in the outdoors, and they hike and they bike and they cross-country ski, and yet very rarely do you ever see sign of cougars, and yet there have been studies conducted by members of my own department where they've radio-collared these cougars, and there are a significant number within a 50-mile radius of the town of the city of Pocatello. So they are able to. You're right. They're able to remain extremely elusive, and so I don't think that we have to, resort to extraordinary explanations for how, admittedly, a very large animal can remain evasive and elusive in its very remote habitat.
We have a question from a listener. What other alternatives have you ever entertained? Let me put it that way. That's the easiest way to explain this.
Right. Well, it has been suggested, for example, that maybe Bigfoot is an earlier hominid, that before the appearance of the genus Homo, which is associated with material culture, and these earlier bipeds. I mean, this approach would assume that bipedalism is such a unique characteristic that it's rather unlikely that it would have evolved independently in such a similar way more than once. And so that shared characteristic would have been inherited from a common ancestor. Therefore, Bigfoot would have been an offshoot from this early hominid radiation, like the robust Australopithecines. And there are some really remarkable resemblances in the. I did a little study one time where I took the skull of Zinjanthropus, formerly called Zinjanthropus, Australopithecus boise.
Right. Could you explain to us just briefly what that is exactly?
Yes. This was a hominid that existed in Africa up into the early Pleistocene.
The early Pleistocene, folks, being the early what about 30,000 years ago at this point?
Well, at least, yeah, more like 500,000 years ago.
Oh, so much, quite 500,000 years ago,
yeah.
Quite a long time ago. Okay.
500,000 years ago, yeah. And but it developed extreme adaptations of its chewing apparatus, very deep, heavy jaws, and high, thick cheekbones, and a crest on the skull to support the muscles that would drive these very large jaws, carrying very thick enameled, thick crowned teeth. And I did a little graphic to show if you took the skull of this very robust, very heavily boned hominid and juxtaposed it against a close-up of the subject of the Patterson-Gimlin film, there was remarkable congruence in the proportions and the various landmarks of that skull to those that were evident and visible on the Patterson-Gimlin film. This simply suggesting, to my mind, that the Bigfoot shares some of these same extreme adaptations of the cranium for chewing heavy, coarse food items. But some would take that similarity to suggest that maybe Sasquatch is a giant form, a large form of this robust Australopithecine species or group of species that existed in Africa. The challenge of that suggestion, that proposal, is this tremendous gap between Africa and North America across Asia, with at this point anyway, nary a fossil record in between, and the disparity in size and habitat and so forth. Whereas in the form of Gigantopithecus, this giant ape that lived in the Pleistocene up until presumably acknowledged as recently as 250,000, 300,000 years ago in Eastern Asia, a large terrestrial ape with some of the same adaptations of the jaws and teeth and so forth, although our fossil record of that form is very, very limited. But here you have an animal that's the right size, in the right place, at the right time, to be a very reasonable candidate for a species that could have extended its range across the Bering Land Bridge into North America. Now, when I say Bering Land Bridge, oftentimes people immediately imagine or envision this windswept, cold Arctic tundra just joining between Siberia and Alaska. And admittedly, at times it was that kind of an environment. But many people are unaware that at other times it was a lush, temperate forest that extended from southern China all the way into British Columbia as one contiguous habitat of mixed coniferous and deciduous forest. And so it seems very reasonable that a Gigantopithecus could have, just through the natural extension of its home range into the more northerly latitudes as the climates permitted, spread into North America and exploited the same types of forest habitats, many of the same species of plants and trees and so forth that were available, and the same resources, salmon and so forth.
So it wouldn't have even, this animal, or if it is an animal, wouldn't have even had to left its habitat. Now, when we get back, a number of you are asking about the Patterson film, and that is, of course, one of the big centerpieces in this book. We will be addressing that later in the show. We're also going to be addressing if Sasquatch is a pre-hominid. Where does human begin and animal end? And where are we there with this remarkable creature? Subscribe to UnknownCountry.com. If you subscribe to UnknownCountry.com, you get not only the streaming audio of this program, but you get a 4-year archive plus all kinds of special perks and remarkable special interviews. Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science by Jeff Meldrum, available in bookstores everywhere. And if you have even the slightest interest in this subject, or no interest, you should get this book because it will open your mind. This is real. There's something out there. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. For those of you who are watching and listening as we make this program live on Blog TV, welcome and thank you for coming. This is our beta test. We are testing this process right now. We are not actually, most of our listeners do not know that you can even do this, but they will soon, and there will be more of you there. So if you have any questions for Jeff Meldrum, please ask in the chat room, and we will see them and respond right away. Now, Jeff, before we left the air, and we're going to get to the Patterson video just very shortly, but before we left the air, I asked you a question about the degree to which if this is a pre-hominid, is it an animal or a human being? And do you have any sense of where we are in terms of evolution with this creature?
Right. Well, the definition of human being has kind of been rather amorphous and almost a political issue in various discussions. I think that we, from a strict taxonomic sense, we reserve that title of human being to members of the species Homo sapiens. And, for example, there's been recent debates of whether that title should extend to even close allies like the Neanderthals. And some would suggest that it's a distinct species, Homo neanderthalensis. Some would say, no, it's a subspecies, it's capable of interbreeding. It was just a somewhat isolated population for some time, and so it should be Homo neanderthalensis or Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. I think that we're enough removed that those types of issues aren't even at question. If Sasquatch is human, and I'm not going to completely rule out that possibility, but I'm just saying that if it is, then we have to entertain a definition of humanity that is very, very different. Than
I guess what I'm asking is this. If Sasquatch is, say, Java Man, if Sasquatch is Australopithecus, it's not yet human, almost certainly. But if it's something else, like Java Man, for example, could it be?
Well, then you have to explain if that's your working hypothesis. Then you have to propose an explanation for how a species, Homo erectus or Homo ergaster in Africa, which is known to have an extensive fossil record, a very distinctive toolkit, controlled use of fire, home bases, structures, and so forth. Why is it that this species then suddenly abandoned all of those accoutrements and adopted what appears to be a behavioral repertoire that's more aligned with the great apes, with no or very little modification of its environment, very little in the way of the use or manipulation of material objects to go about its foraging and food processing, etc. Instead, like I said, everything that we and I think one of the first people who really, well, several have. Mr. John Green, in his book, The Apes Among Us, really drove home this notion that we were dealing with a great ape. John Bindernagel, in his book, North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch, does a very good job of reviewing for the lay reader the literature on primate and great ape anatomy and behavior, and does a great job of showing how many of the reports that he has investigated firsthand, and particularly centered in the Pacific Northwest or Western Canada and British Columbia, show analogy to anatomies and behaviors and vocalizations and so forth of the known great apes. I mean, it fits that pattern, and that's why I'm still in the point that it for me it fits that pattern so well. It's the more straightforward explanation that doesn't require resorting to some other extraordinary explanation or elaboration of the definition of humanity and so forth to accommodate this otherwise anomalous situation.
Well, so it could be, and you speak about, and it went past me a little quickly, about the creature who went back, who abandoned the accoutrements of pre-hominid life, of fire and so forth, and went back to being a great ape without any real change in its environment. And that was a subject that interested me a lot a few years ago. I read about this, and it was fascinating to me because it made me think about various events that have happened in the course of human culture where civilizations have suddenly simply walked away from themselves, most notably the Mayans, and yet the Yucatan is still full of Mayan people who no longer have anything to do with their civilization, and one wonders if they weren't, if it wasn't just a better or easier lifestyle, that they didn't have, that the environment wasn't really making the demands on them that were necessary for them to continue to evolve in the direction of being more advanced.
Sure, and that's an intriguing possibility, and you're right. There are examples of cultures reverting, or I shouldn't say reverting, but abandoning certain levels of technology. I mean, our technological prowess balances precariously on this little pinpoint of our energy resources. And should those come to a screeching halt, we would take quite a large step backward.
We would
in our technological mastery of our environment. But yet, even then, I mean, even when we go back to some of the earliest civilizations, the least technologically advanced, they still have a rich material culture of some sort, and they communicate. They have oral traditions. They have mythology. They have all these things. And I'm not saying that Sasquatch, I mean, I have no basis to say that they don't, but on the other hand, I have no basis to say that they do. I have no evidence to suggest, they're not leaving pictographs anywhere that we know of. They're not.
But there are Indian pictographs that suggest that people were seeing them quite a while ago.
Yes. Oh, exactly. I know.
Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah. Well, and that's quite interesting. And I've actually taken a much more pointed interest in this more recently. We've been working in Wyoming with some colleagues. One in particular is an archaeologist and has shared some of his insights that he's garnered from his Native American contacts and his survey of various pictographs and from the depiction, very anatomically accurate depictions of footprints that are quite distinct from those that are clearly identified as belonging or being indicating human footprints. For example, broad, flat footprints without an arch and different toe composition or toe row configuration. But also figures, interesting figures that are embellished with the very broad shoulders, small head, oftentimes with exaggerated hands and feet, 5 digits and long dexterous fingers and so forth, whereas the humans are then otherwise rendered as simple stick figures.
Right.
So why is there this? Well, if you encountered an animal that instead of having hooves or paws with claws had a remarkably human-like hand, this is one of the things it's always stunning when people are so enamored by watching monkeys and apes is their manual dexterity and they have nails instead of claws like we do, and it's a common link so to speak. And so I think an indigenous people who would encounter an animal that had some of those characteristics would be remarkably impressed by that, and then would go to great lengths to depict that in their art, and that seems to be the case. Recently there's a lot of has been said about this stone foot that's on display up in a museum in British Columbia.
Tell us a little bit about this, if you will.
Again, we are indebted to John Green for drawing our attention to this, but there is this carved foot of a large scale. In fact, there's a couple of broken off pieces. The apparent big toe, based on its differential enlargement of the circumference of this point of breakage, suggesting a big toe is missing, and it appears to have broken presumably about mid-foot. And if you presumed that it continued on back as a full-length foot, it would be remarkably similar to about a 16-inch Sasquatch track.
Those Sasquatch tracks are big, boy.
Yeah. And this has, what amazes me is the anatomical detail. The artist has indicated a flexion crease across the forepart of the foot that would correspond to a crease that has appeared in some Sasquatch tracks. But yet, when you look at the top rendering, they even went to the bother of carving out the toes as seen from above, but the toes are very long, suggesting that there's this thick sole pad that creates this kind of webbing up between the toes as seen from the inferior, the plantar view. The other thing that's remarkable is that these long toes don't have any indication of claws, but instead have nails, very accurate nails. And upon very close examination, they even went to the detail of the nails have that little in curve, like where you tend to get an ingrown toenail, as it kind of curves in underneath, and the detail is remarkable.
And of course, the reason it's like that is they were seeing something not human, and it was much more interesting to them. That's why they went into such detail. Yeah. Are there any legends that go along with these drawings?
Well, in the case of some of the petroglyphs, yes, there are, and they're often in areas where there have been both historically sightings and reports and encounters, and even in contemporary times. ones that we examined that had this remarkable depiction of the large feet and exaggerated 5-digit hands was up a canyon that had just in a couple decades ago, I guess it was. There was a whole series of reports that emanated from this area that involved the landowner and the rancher who had seen this creature on his property. So there are the Native Americans tend to be more circumspect in describing or discussing the significance of these petroglyphs because they have spiritual significance for them.
Right.
And they are a little bit, and understandably, reticent about sharing that kind of intimate knowledge with white
outsiders,
people, with outsiders who so often denigrate or deride or trivialize or make fun of these beliefs that they hold, and so they would just as soon not.
Well, we're going to take a little break right now, and when we get back, we're going to deal with this question: has Bigfoot ever been actually spotted, in the context of the other question many of you are asking about the Patterson film, the Patterson-Gmelin film. And also we're going to ask Jeff about DNA evidence. Is there any? We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. For those of you who are watching us for the first time on Blog TV, Dreamland is also available as an audio stream from Saturday afternoons at 3 p.m. on unknowncountry.com, my website. I'm the author, Whitley Strieber, and I've been doing this show for about 10 years. It's one of the larger, I guess, audio blogs on the Internet. It has about 150,000 monthly listeners. And you can listen free to the last 4 shows. And if you subscribe, you can also listen to the last 4 years of programming without any commercial breaks or commercial interruptions. So do subscribe to unknowncountry.com. It's a wonderful website. We depend entirely on paid subscriptions for our life, and it's a very well-liked website, so I think you'll enjoy it too. Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science. Jeff Meldrum's wonderful new book about Sasquatch. It's something that we are automatically trained to laugh about by the snickering in the media. And yet a scientist as prominent as Jane Goodall is now saying that we really shouldn't be laughing about this, that there is something extraordinary here. And there are a couple of, let me begin, Jeff, by asking you the DNA question. Do we have any DNA, Sasquatch DNA?
Well, not definitive, although, as a sneak peek here, there was an incident that occurred that I was involved in the investigation, and one of my colleagues also involved did run some analysis on a sample of purported blood from a source up in Canada, and it was a very challenging analysis because of some inhibiting factors that were preventing the normal process that is followed to generate a sequence of DNA.
Now, when you say inhibiting factors, what do you mean?
Well, there was something there, some proteins or some bacterial action or something was preventing the primers, which are the little sequences of DNA that are used to kind of jumpstart the process to make a copy in order to make multiple copies that can then from which can be generated an actual sequence. And it required him to subject the sample to processes that would clean or remove or eliminate those inhibiting factors. He then got a short sequence, and it had one particularly interesting substitution. So 1 out of 300 nucleotides differed from the human sequence. Now the question is, does that fall within normal human variation? And sometimes it's difficult to ascertain that for particular samples, unless a large sample of individuals are surveyed. If this animal is very closely related to humans, say, for example, that it is more closely related than chimpanzees even, say it is perhaps in that early hominid radiation,
right,
then we would expect less than maybe 1 to 3% difference in the DNA sequence.
So,
So one out of 300 is even less than that. I mean, we're down at 0.3% difference. So it remains to be seen. It was intriguing. It was it's a substitution that's not unknown in humans, but it's very unusual. And under the circumstances, the individual, if it was a human that left the blood, and I won't divulge all the circumstances, it'll be aired on a documentary here eventually. But it would have had to have had, the individual would have had to have had a 16-inch foot to have left the sign that it left.
He's bound to be known in the neighborhood if he has a 16-inch foot.
Exactly. Problem is, this neighborhood is extremely remote, can only be reached by float plane, and is about 250 miles from anything in any direction. So,
well, if there's a guy that big living around there, anyone who had ever been in the area would certainly know him, because he would have to make himself known from time to time. I think that we can assume that maybe this blood is the real thing. But let me ask you another question. Are you familiar with any of the attempts to sequence Neanderthal DNA? There have been a couple recently, I know.
There have, yes. There have been several. In fact, the most recent one was quite intriguing because it was an analysis of DNA extracted from bones that were found in Siberia,
right,
which extended the known range of Neanderthals several thousand kilometers to the.
And how close was this DNA to ours?
Well, it falls out. I mean, when it was analyzed or compared with humans, rather than clustering more closely to any one particular group of humans, it fell completely outside. So, in other words, it was more different from modern European DNA than modern European DNA is different from Australian Aborigines.
So this actually tells us something. It tells us that whatever is out there, whatever Sasquatch is, from at the moment until we have more clear DNA evidence, the evidence we do have suggests that this species maybe branched off from the human species later than Neanderthals? Am I right about that? Or
no, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay.
Because the differences, I mean, the differences in this DNA, I mean, if it's really not prudent to draw too suggestive an inference or conclusion from only 300 bases. That's a very, I mean, typically
it's just not enough.
Yeah, you would need to have hundreds or thousands rather, so 100 times that amount before any really significant conclusions. But it's tantalizing. I mean, the fact that there was this very unusual substitution that appeared in this sample, which either had to, I mean, the idea was that the blood originally was bare, but it clearly wasn't bare. I mean, it was human blood, or it was human-like blood in the similarity of its DNA to humans, but yet it had that unusual difference. So that's intriguing. That's why I say, while my working hypothesis is that this is a large great ape, it may be more different from a great ape than I'm giving credit at this stage. But and this might be that missing evidence that I was saying, that there just was no evidence that I'd experienced otherwise that would suggest I abandoned that hypothesis and explore another one yet.
Now let's talk. We need to turn now to the Patterson film, the most famous piece of Bigfoot evidence in the world. A brief film of a strange creature moving up a creek bed with a long stride, obviously hurrying out of sight. Now, you extensively discuss this film in your book, in the best analysis of the Patterson film I've ever seen. And tell us first a little bit about the Patterson film, and then let's go, we're getting rather close to the end of the show, so then let's go into a brief discussion of just where you think this is. Is this evidence of Bigfoot or not? But first tell us a little bit about the origins of the film.
Right. Well, Roger Patterson had become interested in this subject after reading an article by Ivan Sanderson in Men's Magazine, and then he had heard about, or on trips down through California, had spoken to some of the locals and made some acquaintances. Al Hodgson, who ran a little mercantile down in Willow Creek, made him aware of the discovery of a rather extensive line of footprints that had been investigated thoroughly by John Green and Rene de Hinden. And so as soon as Roger could make arrangements and persuaded his friend Bob Gimlin, who had the horse trailer and the horses, and Bob had to take care of business on his ranch and so forth in order to go. So a couple weeks transpired before they were down there. In the intervening time, rain had kind of obliterated the tracks that they had wanted to seize, but they decided to stay on for several weeks to look and prospect for more sign. And so they had been there for about 2 weeks, riding up and down these canyons and along the roads, on horseback and in the truck sometimes. And on that particular afternoon, they rounded a corner. Their view up the creek had been obstructed by this big crow's nest, a big tangle of roots and trees. A flood had come through there a couple of years earlier. And there on the creek side, the horses suddenly reacted to the presence of something right there on the creek side. Roger's horse reared and fell on its side. He very adroitly grabbed his camera from his saddlebag and yelled to Bob to cover him as he ran across the creek towards this retreating figure that was making its way, angling upstream, up the creek, across this rather extensive sandbar. And this sand was, fortunately, was not just regular beach sand, but it was this almost a schist that very angular, so it held the tracks remarkably well, which allowed them to be studied by other people coming to the side. I actually had a sample of that sand examined and described by one of our physical geologists here on campus, and he made that very comment. He said the nature of the sand is such that it's excellent for holding tracks. And anyway, so that's what happened. He got a few seconds, a number of seconds of film.
Now, didn't he say that it was a hoax before he died? Am I confused about that?
No, he didn't. And this is this.
But somebody did.
Well,
after he died.
Right. There were two stories that keep getting conflated. Roger did die of leukemia, but on his deathbed maintained his story, and right up to the very end. There were two stories that seemed to have gotten conflated. One was the Wallace story, where Ray Wallace passed away. Ray was a foreman on a construction crew that was building roads for salvage logging as a result of this flood that had ripped out this canyon that they were in. And when he passed away, his family claimed that all the footprints that had been left in the Northwest were made by these wooden feet, these crude wooden feet that the Wallaces had.
Which you can easily prove is not true.
Right. I mean, you can flip open my book and there's just a simple, if the
it's very straightforward. It's simply not true. It's a lie.
Yeah, exactly. And that story then was conflated, too, with a gentleman, resident of Yakima, where Bob and Roger were from, claimed that he was the man in the fursuit. And then he linked up with a gentleman from out east somewhere, and I've gone blank as to what state he was from, but Philip Morris, who owns a very successful and large costume manufacturing company. The most gorilla suits that you've seen on various comedies from I Love Lucy and so forth have been from his stock. And he claimed that he looked at this film and said, "Oh, that's one of my costumes." Well, he's got a peculiar eye then, because anyone else that looks, there's no obvious comparison to be made.
Now we have just 2 minutes left together, so I would like, if you want to draw a conclusion here, I would like to know two things. First, where you think we are with this. Is Sasquatch real? And second, where are you going? Because this book is a tremendous achievement by obviously a very skilled author and an excellent scientist. So I'm very excited about where you may be taking this incredible human adventure in the future.
Well, thank you. The intent of the book is not to convince people that Sasquatch is real, but rather it's to convince people, and particularly my scientific colleagues, that the evidence fully warrants and, in fact, begs for further scientific investigation into this question to resolve it definitively. I mean, I acknowledge that the suggestive evidence that we have is not yet enough. We have to have, I mean, at least for official scientific recognition. So the direction I'm taking it, we're taking it several ways. One is ongoing field work, where our main objective being to collect DNA, fresh tissue from which DNA can be extracted, to make that definitive assessment of the genetic identity of whatever species this is. And then we're also, I mean, I also conduct a lot of laboratory work and try to coordinate others' efforts. I mean, the book has continually opened doors and brought people forward. So we have some new things happening with the hair analysis. We have some great things happening with more systematic archiving and more quantitative analysis of the footprints. We have just launched a new online peer-reviewed journal called the Relic Hominoid Inquiry, which will provide a venue for scholarly publications on the search for Sasquatch, the study of the evidence, and other unrecognized hominoids from around the world. You know, we talked about the Yeti, the orangutan deck, all these different interesting phenomenon that are each individually suggestive of maybe relic populations of either apes or, in some instances, perhaps even hominids.
And we're going to have to finish now, and I would like to recommend your book again, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science from Tor Books, the author Jeff Meldrum, an extraordinary book. It's not often that people like Peter Matheson and Jane Goodall speak up on behalf of research into Bigfoot, and they did that because of the quality of the effort that has been made here. Tremendously exciting reading. Thank you very much for being with us, Jeff Meldrum. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. This week, Linda Moulton Howe's report comes from Florida, where, guess what's been seen again? Black triangles. That's right. And where can you find out more every day about this and so many other extraordinary edge science topics? But earthfiles.com. Linda tells the truth and gives you the facts the others will not on earthfiles.com. Don't miss earthfiles.com. Do support earthfiles.com. And now here she is from Albuquerque, our own Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, thanks, Whitley. It was 10 and a half years ago, on March 13th, 1997, that a series of unidentified aerial objects showed up over the state of Arizona, beginning from around 7:30 p.m. until at least 10:30 p.m. that night. The early evening craft was a huge black triangle with a few red lights underneath. Real estate professionals in Phoenix who saw it estimated that the low, slow-moving, and completely silent huge triangle was at least 1.8 miles long. And they based that calculation in a comparison to a 1.8-mile-long housing development that this triangle flew over. Another report that night was from a truck driver traveling on a freeway from the north of Phoenix to the south. He watched two large orange-white spheres pulsing on and off near Luke Air Force Base. Others videotaped and reported to local TV stations smaller white lights spaced evenly in an arc. 4 months later, the U.S. government tried to explain the 3 hours of extraordinary aerial phenomena now known as the Phoenix Lights, as military flare exercises from Luke Air Force Base. None of the eyewitnesses believed that explanation. And now comes another multiple eyewitness sighting of two large orange-white spheres pulsing on and off while emitting smaller white glowing discs that circled the orange-white spheres and then took off after red lights in the distance as if in attack mode, the eyewitnesses thought. The location is Youngstown, Florida, northeast of Tyndall Air Force Base, which is in Panama City. The date was Monday, October 1st, 2007. The time was approximately 7:30, and 4 adults and 2 teenagers watched astonished as the red and white lights seemed to be in conflict, followed soon after by the appearance of a large dark triangle with a few red lights that separated from the base of the triangle and flew off, maybe to encounter the white disc. One of the eyewitnesses is 45-year-old Thelma Landers, mother of 14-year-old Zach. She recently contacted me because she and her neighbors want to know if anyone else has seen the orange-white spheres, the smaller glowing discs, the red lights that were chased, or the huge triangle that moved over them at tree-top level, completely silent, as big as a football field. Thelma is twice divorced and now lives in a Youngstown trailer home raising Zach. She and her son had been to the supermarket to buy groceries and had just turned onto Highway 2301 when Zach became excited about lights in the sky.
And my son said, "Mom, look." And then there were 2 bright orange lights, bright white lights. To me, it had a tint of orange. Mm-hmm. There they were, and then they disappeared. We turned, we went to my home, parked in my yard, and I looked up as I was getting out of the truck, and I said, "Oh, wow." We seen the 2 large white lights, and then I seen a small white disc, like a really bright white, going around it. And I told my son, I said, "Run and get the neighbors." So my son went across the way, which is not too far, to get Anita, George, and Cody. Brian had came out of his home and asked what was going on, and he lives across the street from me. And I said, "Look up." And my son was saying, "Look up." So we had 4 adults and 2 teenagers standing in the yard, and I said, "Do you think it'll happen again?" And Zach says, "Yeah, look at the little white lights." And they were going around, and it looked like they were chasing after red fast beams in the sky. And then it did it again. It lit up, just bright lights on, bright lights off. The little white beams would circle it and then dart off when the lights went off. And then we talked about it in the yard. We didn't know what it was.
The little white lights, did you, your son, or the neighbors, did any of you see the little white lights come out of either of the bigger white orangey lights?
No.
They just suddenly were there going in a circle around both of the orange-white lights?
It looked like the white lights were chasing the red lights, and every time the bright white lights would come on, the 2 larger ones, it looked like they would go back to that, circle around it, go out real quickly, and then they would dart off again, catching up to the red lights.
I see, and now the question is, are the little white bright lights taking orders from the larger lights, or just exactly what was happening?
They were in conflict. I feel like the red lights were trying to get away from the little tiny white lights, and it happened 4 times.
And those little white lights or discs seem to definitely have a relationship to the 2 larger orange-white lights.
Yes.
How long did all this go on?
It took about, I'd have to say, 45 minutes.
Okay. You are all there.
Right.
What happened next?
We were standing there talking about how the little white lights were chasing the red lights. I reached in the back of my truck, picked up my groceries, and my son said, "Mom, look up, look up." And I turned around to see a very bright light coming towards me with a triangle shape, coming very low over the treetop, coming over my home and over my head where I was standing. And it was triangle-shaped. I could see that it was very black, like if you had a cockpit on an airplane. It was round like that, but it was black. It was mostly in the front, like round. The lights went off real quick when I turned around and saw it, and then it hovered above us. And I said, "Does anybody hear a noise?" They said, "No." I could see that when the triangle-shaped object came over my head, it was very large. I'd have to say it was more than a half an acre wide. It looked like that because when I looked up, it was reaching on my property and over on the other property. And when I looked up, the 2 lights were on one left wing, one in the middle, and one partially almost the tip, and then one was on the far right wing, a red light, partially on the tip. When I looked up, I told myself, okay, don't panic. And it looked like a gray and black color, and the light was really bright. The red light was really bright, close to the center. And when I seen the bright light, I said, okay, I'm looking at something that looks like a red light inside of a box, because it had two lines, two squares going around it. And it kept moving slowly, and I said, well, I don't hear anything. And then I worried to myself, I said, my son has got asthma. I said, this thing is going to put fumes out. It's close by. I said, are you all right? And they said, yeah. And next thing I know, this bright red light looks like the sun peeking through after rain, like it's peeking through a beam with shining down on my eyes. It came in a movement of coming across. One straight line, it looked like red. It was a beam of light, but it was red. And when it came across my eyes, I said, uh-oh, and I was going to turn my head, and it caught me, and I shook it off, looked back up, and it was across the way, I'd say about a mile. By the time I came to my senses and looked up again, I had seen that it was in the distance. Everybody said, well, watch this, look. And I heard my son say, watch the red light. Two of the red lights underneath it darted off to the left, and one of the red lights on the right darted off to the right.
Now, do you mean those red lights left the bottom of that huge triangle and flew off?
Yes. When they took off to the left, there were two, and then the right, one of the lights on the right took off to the right, and I knew there were three lights. I didn't hear any noise, and by the time that I came to my senses off the red light that flashed in my eyes, it was a little bit further out. You could see it going past my home, past my land, which I have an acre of land, and it was over there pretty good. I felt a breeze, just a large breeze after it had passed.
And Thelma, I think what you're suggesting is that you became aware that there must be missing time if you went from seeing it close up over you and the red beam comes at your face, and the next thing that you know, it's far away.
Yes. Nobody said anything. I was quiet then. I said, I've got to get the groceries in. They're melting. And I was sort of confused and shocked because something so large had no noise, no fumes, and all of a sudden, two jets came close, the treetops on top of the trees. These two jets flew overhead very quickly. They had their lights on, and they went the other way. They didn't go towards the object. They did not even approach the object. It looks like they went completely the other way.
So when did you start to think, maybe this is a UFO?
I started to think that when I seen it coming over the treetops, as large as it was. I had never seen something that large, and I've never seen something so dark and black. And I looked underneath it and seen those lights, and I said, I've never seen this before. And I thought, oh, my God, my son, my neighbors, they're over there. I guess I was upset to see something so large and know that this can't be one of ours. We don't have that kind of technology, I thought. But when it came over us, there was no sound. When I talked, there was no echo between the two homes. Usually there's an echo between my home and my neighbor's home, but when I talked, it sounded like a voice. I couldn't hear the crickets. I couldn't hear the frogs in the swamp. I couldn't hear the dogs bark. There was no noise at all.
And while this huge triangle was over you, you were about 200 feet away from your son and the neighbors?
Right.
When the red beam came out of this huge triangle, it was aimed only at your face?
I don't know.
Something had happened, and more time had gone on than you were consciously aware. And I wonder, did you feel any heat or cold or tingling or anything when the red beam of light hit your face?
When I looked up and it did flash in my eyes, I worried about my eyes, and I said, well, I'm wearing glasses, so it didn't hurt me as much. So when I was inside my home, I looked at my son, and I told him, I said, I feel like I've been burned. It feels funny on my left side of my face. He said, did you get burned? I go, I don't know. I said, I just feel funny. I said, it feels kind of red. And he said it was red. My son said it was red.
He didn't say to you, I saw the red beam of light come out of the big triangle and hit your face?
No.
By then you were thinking UFO from someplace in outer space?
I was hoping it was one of our military projects, and I thought to myself, this couldn't have been one of our military projects because the military flew away from it.
It is almost as if this large triangle showed you that it was responsible for the red flying objects.
Right. And we all discussed it as we were standing there, that it looks like the white lights were chasing the red lights, and we couldn't understand that.
Like they were in conflict.
They were in conflict, and it went on for some time because we seen the big two white lights with those tiny little glow light discs chasing the red lights. We seen this 4 times, and we sort of got the notion it was maybe like a chase.
What happened the very next night?
Tried to go to sleep, and my little Jack Russell dog.
It's a Jack Russell 3-year-old?
3 years old. He's very well trained. He's a very quiet dog because I told him to be quiet most of the time, and he knew that when I said be quiet, that was to be quiet. And we went to sleep, and my dog jumped up on the bed, came beside me, and the window's above my head, and he started to growl. And I've never seen him act like this. Usually he would woof, one little woof if there was something outside, you know, another dog or anything. But he growled low.
And this was warning you?
This was warning me because he was waking me up. He actually came up to me and poked his nose on my nose, and I heard him growl again, and I said, this isn't right. And I sat up, and I said, what is it? He growled again. I said, okay, I'll get up. And I opened the curtain slightly. The security lights weren't on, and I peeked outside, and I was scared. I thought I had seen an object out there, and then the security lights came on, and I heard another growl. It was a low growl. And I went back to my bedroom, and he growled again, and he looked out the window, and I told him to be quiet. My son woke up and said, Mom, what's wrong? What is it? He said, Mom, is it aliens?
But what do you think you saw?
I thought I had seen 2 heads, and I thought, okay, it was a light color, and I'm not seeing things very well. The security lights weren't on, so when I seen the 2 heads just the top of them. My mobile home is up high because of the swamp. We have a swamp area here, and my trailer is like the window, maybe 8 foot, and when I peeked out the window, I had seen the object, 2 of them. One was in front, one was in back, and all I could see was the head. I went to the front, and I thought to myself, well, the security lights aren't on. I looked, and they popped on. My dog was acting very strange, and I told him when I went back to the bedroom, he was growling. I said, lay down, and he didn't want to lie down. He would watch, and he would look where my air conditioner is, and he would point towards the air conditioner and the corner of, it's the end bedroom, so my bedroom would be at the end, and he kept looking towards the end of my trailer, pointing outwards towards, you know, there's somebody there, I had thought, on the outside of my mobile home.
Right, and the very first thing that your son said upon waking was, Mom, is it alien?
Yes.
Did you ask your son why he woke up asking that question?
No, I thought, I don't want to scare him, but I told him no, go back to sleep. I sat up all night.
And did you ever try to see what might be out there at the air conditioner?
My thought was, when I shut the curtain, I thought, okay, there's 2 heads out there, and it's dark, and the heads were lower, and I thought there's no possible way someone could reach up to the window. And I tried to tell myself, there's no way there could be aliens outside that window. And when my son said, Mom, is it aliens? I didn't want to scare him. I didn't want to say, oh, well, by the way, I just seen something out my window. No, I didn't tell him that. But my dog was saying it for me. My dog said a lot. When he growls and acts the way he did, it tells me a lot. I mean, don't open the window, don't move, don't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And your dog was telling you, if you try to go out, it could be very dangerous.
Yes, he was right behind me every step of the way. Never seen this kind of behavior before.
Yeah. We're talking on Tuesday, October 16th, so it has been 2 weeks since this all occurred. Have you had, or your son had, any really clear virtual reality dreams in these past 2 weeks about discs, triangles, or non-humans?
I have had no sleep, hardly. He goes to school and keeps busy, pretty much. I asked him twice, did you have any dreams? Are you okay? He says, no, Mom, I'm okay. And he doesn't want to talk about it, really. I went out there one time this week and shined the light on the field. There's about 2 acres that has tall grass in it, and I took my truck out there, I shined the lights out there because my son was scared, and he thought, Mom, it's aliens, but I didn't see anything.
Did you ever go and look around your air conditioning to see if you could find any evidence that anybody or anything had been there?
Yes, I did. And the next day I went outside, got the dog on his leash, and I looked around my window, and I had seen that the area in some places looked like something heavy was there because it pressed down the grass, just as if they were footprints.
And when your security lights come on, do they come on automatically by a motion sensor outside?
Yes.
So that night, when your dog was alarmed and woke you up with a growl, and when you got up, the lights were not on.
They were not on.
As you got up and you're following your dog, that's when
the lights turned on outside.
Yeah, suddenly provoked by something outside that you couldn't exactly see.
Right. Where's our military? Where's our jet? You know, they should be here. They should be stopping all this.
And if the red lights are associated with that gigantic silent triangle, and the little white lights are associated with the larger orange-white lights,
right.
What is the problem, the conflict between the big triangle and those orange-white lights? And who is in the triangle and who is in the orange-white light?
I don't know. When the triangle object came over our heads, we were speechless. I was scared. I know Anita was scared. And the 2 men there, Brian and George, didn't know what to say. And, of course, the kids were there. Well, they're teenagers. They didn't know what to say.
And as a reporter, my frustration is that I know that our government knows a great deal about what is happening with non-humans on this planet, but they want everybody to accept when they say there's nothing there, a policy of denial.
Right. This UFO or this object that came by, I felt like there was a chase and there was a conflict in the skies, and I felt like this object didn't mind showing itself to us or to anybody else around, and I felt like that was his territory. That was that object's territory. It just moved slowly over the horizon. The triangle was telling us, and this is what scared us the most, it was telling us that it had control. Everything's under our control. We don't care if you see us. Here we are. This is our territory, and there's nothing you can do. And when we saw the jets fly by and go the opposite direction, and then we saw like a conflict in the sky, it had us all thinking, well, is our military going to do something? We didn't know what to think. All we knew, that object, that triangle in the sky, with no noise, whoever was in there, they didn't care if we seen it or not. And we're all upset by that.
And what's so interesting is that occurred right after you saw those little white lights leave the larger orange-white lights and go after, in an attack mode, the red lights that might have been from the large triangle.
Right, right. They knew the chase was on.
And if there is conflict, what is the conflict about? And what does our government know about who's in that triangle, who's in those orange-white lights? And does our government know what the conflict is about and can't do anything to interfere?
Right. And our government, we know that the jets flew by. They know the location. They knew exactly where it went. And they did not come tell the people. Nothing was reported on the news. Everything's quiet.
Whitley, do you have any idea what kind of non-human would be in these large, silent, black triangles?
Well, yeah, Linda, I think that it's classically the Greys that she's dealing with. And however, it seems like there's three parties involved here. Human beings who turned tail and scuttled off, and Greys and somebody else. It could be two different groups of Greys. That's also quite possible. That certainly happened before. But Linda, I have to take my hat off to you. This is one of the best close encounter reports I've ever heard in my life. It's phenomenal. It's a brilliant job.
Well, thank you. And I thought this was highly important as well. And I've asked her to stay in touch. And believe it or not, when I did that interview with her on the 16th, a night later on the 17th, I received an email from a group of men who were 140 miles south of that general Panama City area, also in this past week, and they are writing and sending me drawings that they are seeing extraordinary, white, yellow, red, unusual lights. I don't know how far this story is going, Whitley, but something is happening in Florida, and we have so many military installations there.
Linda, this thing is getting closer and closer. It's like a little old fly that's been buzzing around the human species for a long time and is starting to land for a few minutes here and there, because we have had many close encounter reports, few close encounter reports that also involve sightings like this. And I can count on the fingers of one hand where a person has a continuity of memory from a sighting through a close encounter, through attempts to investigate subsequent to the encounter, etc., and so forth. And this is the first one where there's been a sequence like this in the same immediate area.
And that she might have had, the whole group might have had, missing time.
They did have.
When that red light went and hit her on the side of her head. And I find that so fascinating, because the only conscious way she knows that something occurred is she knew the light came, she knew that she shifted her head, and then she felt very confused. And when she next visually is looking, this huge triangle that was right up near above her in the trees is now at least, she estimated, at least nearly a mile away.
So they were abducted. There's no question whatsoever in my mind about it, and they know it very well. Poor people. My heart goes out to this little woman and her little boy. I have to tell you, Linda, it's hard. It's hard doing this. And what's even harder is we've come to the end of our time together. Linda Moulton Howe, as always, earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day, obviously, and Dreamland. This is about the only place left. To your book, and how I think quite often people are thinking that bears are actually of various kinds are actually Sasquatch. That happens a lot.
I think that does. I think it does, and you're right. In the book, Lynn Rogers, a brilliant bear biologist, discusses that. He actually thinks that it's probably more likely the reciprocal, and that is that people may see a Sasquatch and because they cannot fit it into their worldview, into their frame of reference, they rationalize it as, well, it must have been a bear, and that may happen as often as other misidentifications in the reverse, seeing a flash of brown fur as a bear retreats from human contact, and of course the imagination gets the better of the witness, and they think Sasquatch must be the answer.
Right.
So misidentification is an important factor. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, I had two instances of people bringing footprints to my attention, photographed in the field, and in both cases they were superimposed, registered fore and hind paws of a bear. One was a very intriguing trackway down a dusty road that where the bear had very consistently stepped, such that the hind paws just overstepped and overlapped the toes of the forepaw, leaving what appeared to be a bipedal track with admittedly wide straddle or wide step width and a very short step length, but this elongated, alternating pattern of elongated footprints. But on closer examination, and thankfully the photographer took some very good, crisp close-ups, you could point out very clearly the hind pad, or the pad of the forepaw with its concavity on its back surface, and some of the toes that escaped the overstepping hind paw, and you could see the divided pad of the hind paw with its metatarsal pad and its calcaneal pad, and there were no evident claw marks.
To Nepal and retraced Tom Slick's footsteps, and he was the first to really put any stock in any of this. And he attempted back in the 50s, with all sorts of limitations we don't have now, a scientific expedition in search of the Yeti. Now, and let me begin by asking if you think that this is an international phenomenon, or is it just confined to the Olympic forest, for example?
Well, there certainly are elements of the wild man motif, the icon, sprinkled throughout cultures worldwide. It does really seem to be a universal phenomenon, and there's been a lot of very interesting discussion about why that is, if this is some holdover of our of times early in the history, the prehistory of the human family, when we very likely shared this planet with other hominids and other very human-like apes that were more common than they are today. Or is it much more pragmatic, much more fundamental, in that there simply are some of those species persisting in various corners in appropriate habitats around the globe? It's not a uniform experience. For example, the Yeti that drew Slick's attention to the Himalayas. We've done some interesting things on analyzing some of the footprints that have been attributed to the Yeti, and a great number of them can easily be dismissed as, or explained rather, as misidentified footprints of common wildlife, like bears, for example. And there seems to be a blurring, in fact, in the boundary between the notion of a bear-like figure and an ape-like figure amongst the Sherpas and indigenous populations in that region.
And the bear-like figure enters quite a bit into your and in what probably is one of the most extraordinary Sasquatch stories you will ever hear. We have been talking about Sasquatch on this radio program ever since Art Bell started it, and we have never been able to really come to a conclusion about what it was. We have listened to hoaxers, we have listened to fake and possibly real Sasquatch calls, we have talked to everybody, but we have never before talked to Jeff Meldrum about his book, Sasquatch, Legend and Science. And something has happened, and I'll just sum it up very simply. Dr. Jane Goodall, the founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, one of the famed scientists working with primates, has said this about this book. Jeff Meldrum's book, Sasquatch, Legend Meets Science, brings a much-needed level of scientific analysis to the Sasquatch or Bigfoot debate. Welcome, Jeff Meldrum, to the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Well, it's very exciting to have you here because we have a great interest on Dreamland in credible edge science, and that's what the show is all about. And very often we go out onto an edge and it's not so credible. But this is different. This is the best Sasquatch book I personally have ever read, to be honest with you, and I've read a lot of them.
Well, thank you.
It has also been a source of wonder for me. Can you tell me a little bit about why you came to this? Because you have taken this to a new level. This is not this is not really speculative anymore. Once one reads this book, you know there is something out there. And there are prominent scientists who are agreeing with you more than Jane Goodall, Peter Matheson, Esteban Sarmiento, research associate at the American Museum of Natural History. Quite a laundry list of prominent names that never would have spoken out about this before your book.
Well, that was been or has been one of the objectives of this endeavor, was to try to elevate the level of discourse, to try to move this from the realm of the just being lumped in with all things paranormal, considered paranormal or mysterious, to a simple question of biological science, and that is there a biological species of primate that lies behind the legend of Sasquatch? And we have tried to enumerate the evidence as it is currently understood that suggests that in fact there is an unrecognized species of primate out there. And I think that's where, I mean, we've always been challenged by this, the unfortunate stigma that has has lumped this subject with various and sundry other topics, some of which, I mean, I'm not passing judgment on any of these others, but many of which have not been fortunate enough to have the solid evidence, the physical evidence and trace evidence that is mounting in the case of the question of Sasquatch. And so some scientists, many scientists, have shied away from it. Those that were interested, that weren't prone to, in a knee-jerk reaction, reject it outright and offhandedly.
Yes.
Now we're starting to have more people speak out a little bit and say, well, yes, we really should look at this. We really should consider this data as scientists are charged to do.
You know, Tom Slick was a good friend of my family's, and I guess she is his daughter-in-law, or by marriage. Well, obviously by marriage, she's his daughter-in-law. Catherine Nixon Cook is a dear friend of ours to this day.
Yes.
And I know Catherine Cook recently went to...
Claws were obviously worn down considerably. But that does happen, and we need to deal with that. But I think it's very nearsighted and very naive for the armchair skeptic to simply dismiss all footprints as misidentified bear tracks. I mean, there clearly are distinguishing characteristics.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking more about what Sasquatch may actually be, if Sasquatch exists, as it apparently does. And then later in the show, we'll be asking you for your questions about this, because for the first time, we are in beta test on blogtv.com, and this show is being broadcast live over Blog TV, and you can ask questions via the Blog TV chat room in the Dreamland section. The book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science by Jeff Meldrum, a very extraordinary and fine book about Sasquatch, available in stores everywhere, available from our Amazon.com store on UnknownCountry.com, and subscribe to UnknownCountry.com. Keep us going. We are subscriber supported. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
I'm going to use this first break to talk a little bit about Blog TV. We are going to be broadcasting Dreamland live on Blog TV as the program is made, and our subscribers will be receiving an email telling you when these broadcasts will take place. If you're a non-subscriber, you can use Blog TV to give you a reminder about when the next program will be aired. On Blog TV, you will be able to see my face, sometimes also the face of my guest, if the guest has a webcam. And you will be able to listen live as we produce Dreamland and be able to send us questions over the chat interface on Blog TV. Now, to do this, you need to go first to blogtv.com and register as a user if you are going to chat. There'll be direct access to Blog TV over unknowncountry.com as well. There will be a direct link to our Blog TV viewer. So enjoy